The summer Nora Quinn turned 24, 3 people drowned off the coast of Callowwick. She wasn't supposed to be there. She'd come to bury her grandmother, a woman who had spent the last 40 years of her life locking every door and window, that faced the sea, who had whispered prayers against the water, who had died with salt on her lips and terror in her eyes. Nora hadn't understood it. She'd grown up inland, far from this grey rock shelf jutting into the Atlantic, and she'd assumed her grandmother was simply eccentric. Old-world superstition. The harmless kind. She stopped assuming things after the first night. The cottage sat at the edge of the cliff path, separated from the sea by 40 feet of eroding limestone. The estate lawyer had handed Nora the key with 2 fingers, as if touching it too long might be catching. "You'll want to sell quickly," he'd said. "These cliffs are unstable." He'd been lying. Nora had pulled the geological survey herself. The cliffs were fine. People in Callowwick just didn't like that house. She found out why at 2 a.m. when the sound woke her. It wasn't music exactly. It was lower than that, something that bypassed her ears entirely and landed in her chest like a second heartbeat. She sat up in the unfamiliar bed and listened to it throb through the floorboards, through the mattress springs, through the fillings in her back teeth. She told herself it was the sea. She told herself this for approximately 4 minutes before she put on her coat and walked outside. The water was flat, impossibly flat. Not a wave, not a ripple, just a black mirror stretching to the horizon. And something was watching her from it. She stood at the cliff's edge in her bare feet and her grandmother's too large coat and looked down at the cove below. A narrow staircase had been cut into the rock face, old, worn smooth, not on any tourist map. She didn't remember deciding to take it. One moment, she was at the top. The next, her feet were on wet stone, the stairs behind her, the sea in front of her. The tide was out. The sand was dark and packed, and she could see it perfectly in the light of a moon that seemed slightly too large, slightly too close, slightly too interested in this particular stretch of coast. She was so busy watching the sand that she almost didn't notice him. He was at the waterline, or rather, he was in the waterline, the Atlantic folding around the lower half of him like it owed him something. He was facing away from her, and Nora could see the line of a bareback, the breadth of shoulders that didn't look entirely human in their dimensions, and where there should have been legs, there was instead a tail. Long, dark, the scales shifting between black and deep green as the water moved around him. Not the tail of some Disney fantasy. Something older. Something that belonged to a creature that had been swimming these depths since before the word ocean existed. She should have screamed. She should have run. Instead, she said, loudly and with the particular clarity of someone who has not fully processed what they're seeing, "What are you doing in my cove?" He turned. The sound stopped. Later, she would try to describe his face to herself and find that she couldn't quite hold all of it at once. She got pieces, dark eyes that caught light the way deep water catches light, all reflection and no depth. A jaw like a cliff face, the kind of stillness that belongs to things that have never had a predator. He was beautiful in the way that riptides are beautiful, something you recognize too late. He looked at her for a long moment with no expression she could name. Then he said, in a voice that was somehow both sound and pressure, "It isn't your cove." He went under before she could answer. No splash, no disruption. The water simply closed over him, and the surface went flat again, and Nora stood on the wet sand until her feet went numb and the moon moved, and the sound did not return. She went, back up the stairs at dawn. She did not sell the cottage. His name, or the closest human pronunciation to it, was Caspian. She found this out a week later, by which point she had seen him 4 more times. 3 of those times he had been watching. She had only noticed once, and only because she'd been watching back. The drowned man had washed up on the North Beach 4 days after her first sighting. The papers called it a swimming accident. The fisherman in the pub called it something else, in voices too low for Nora to catch all the words, but she got enough. His waters shouldn't have gone in. The tally. The tally, she'd asked the woman next to her, a weathered redhead named Bridget who ran the bait shop and seemed to have a low tolerance for ignorance but a high tolerance for answering anyway. Your grandmother never told you. It wasn't a question. She never told me anything about this place. Bridget had looked at her for a long moment with something that might have been pity or might have been calculation. 3 per year, she'd said finally. That's the agreement. Has been for 400 years. 3 lives to the water by midsummer and Callowhick gets everything else. Good fishing, no storms, no disappearances beyond the 3. She'd picked up her glass. Some years it goes smooth. Some years people are stupid. And what happens, Nora had asked, if someone refuses to be part of the tally? Bridget had smiled for the first time, and it hadn't been a comfortable smile. Then he takes 4. Nora had gone back to the cottage and sat with this information for a long time. The 5th time she saw Caspian, she was ready. She'd waited at the waterline with her arms crossed and a thermos of tea she wasn't drinking, because it gave her hands something to do. He surfaced 10 feet out, which she was learning was his preferred distance, close enough to be heard, far enough to be safe. By whose calculation she wasn't sure yet. The tally, she said without preamble. Tell me how it works. Something shifted in his face. The first expression she'd seen that she could actually name. Surprise. And behind it, something sharper. Who told you about the tally? Someone who's lived here long enough to know things. Is it true? He studied her the way she imagined he studied everything, like she was topography, something to be mapped. It is a debt, he said finally. People settled on my feeding ground. Your boats take what is mine. The agreement is what allows you to remain. The agreement is that you drown people. 3. There was no apology in it. Not cruelty either. Just the simple accounting of something that had been decided long before either of them were born. It is a mercy compared to what could be. A mercy. She let the word sit between them. You have a very particular definition of mercy. You have a very particular definition of your cove. The thing that might have been amusement moved through his features again, quick, like light through deep water. You are not afraid of me. I am terrified of you, she said honestly. But I've found that doing things while terrified is more or less the same as not being terrified, so. This time, the thing on his face was unambiguous. He was looking at her the way you look at something unexpected. Something that doesn't fit the established pattern of the world. Your grandmother was afraid, he said. I know. She had reason to be. I know that too. The water moved around him in slow, deliberate circles, like it was responding to something she couldn't hear. His eyes didn't leave hers. In the moonlight, they looked. Not black, she realized. Something older than black. The color the sea is in dreams, where it goes down and nothing comes back up. What do you want? He said, and it wasn't a question so much as something being offered. A door cracked open in the dark. Nora took a breath. I want to understand the terms, she said. All of them. The original agreement. Not the version the town has been passing down like a game of telephone for 4 centuries. I want to know what was actually promised and by whom and what it would take to renegotiate. Long silence. The sea moved. The moon was doing its too large, too close thing again. Renegotiate, he repeated. It's a legal term. It means... I know what it means. And something in his voice, in the precise flatness of it, told her that he had been alive long enough to have watched human language change under him like a current shifts. He wasn't learning from her. He was remembering. No one has asked that before. No one was going to live in the cottage before, she said. I suspect my grandmother made sure of that, but I'm here now, and I need to understand what I've inherited. He looked at her for a moment that stretched out past comfortable and into something else. Come back at the new moon, he said. Come alone. Come to the water, not the edge of it. He went under. Nora stood there for a long time, looking at where he'd been. She realized her thermos had slipped from her fingers at some point and was being gently carried out to sea. She watched it go. Right, she said to nobody. She went to the water at the new moon. She stood in it up to her shins, which was as far as she got before every instinct she possessed staged a mutiny. The cold was extraordinary, not the unpleasant. Cold of a November sea, but something more purposeful. Something that moved around her ankles like hands deciding whether to grip. She thought of the drowned man. She thought of 400 years of tallies. She stayed anyway. Caspian rose from 3 feet in front of her, close enough that she stumbled back and soaked herself to the knee. He caught her. His hand closed around her wrist and she froze, not from fear, exactly, but from the shock of contact, because his skin was not cold the way the water was cold. It was warm. Fever warm. The skin itself was not entirely smooth. There was texture to it, faint and patterned, running from his wrist up the back of his forearm like the memory of scales. He steadied her, let go immediately, and took a half-step back. The original agreement, he said, as though nothing had happened, as though he hadn't just touched her and she hadn't stopped breathing, was made by a man named Seamus Quinn. Her breath went out of her. Quinn, her grandmother's name, her name. He came to my waters in the winter of 1623 with a dying town and a proposition, Caspian continued. His voice had a quality that night, standing this close, that she hadn't noticed before. It came from multiple places at once, like sound bouncing off surfaces underwater. He offered me sovereignty over the cove and 3 lives per cycle in exchange for protection. Safe waters, good catch, no disappearances. 3 lives. The word felt worse up close. He bargained with people's lives. He bargained with his people's lives. The distinction mattered to him. Something shifted in Caspian's expression. Old, she thought. Something he'd been sitting with for 400 years. He was not a good man, but he was an honest one. The terms were clear. The town doesn't know the actual terms. They think it's an accident. 3 drowning accidents per summer. What the town knows is not my concern. It is if I'm renegotiating. On their behalf. He went very still. The water went still around him too, as though it was waiting. You came to renegotiate on behalf of a town that doesn't know you're here. Someone has to. Why? It was a genuine question. She could hear. It. The actual curiosity, the thing underneath the flatness. She thought about it honestly. Because my family started it, she said. A Quinn made the deal. I'm the last Quinn. It seems like a Quinn should be the one to end it. He looked at her for a long time. The water moved against her calves in slow pulses. Above them, the sky was absolutely clear and full of more stars than she had ever seen from any city, and she was standing knee-deep in the Atlantic at midnight, having a legal negotiation with something that was not human, and she was not, she noticed, with distant, surprised, afraid anymore. Or, she was afraid, but it had shifted into something adjacent, something with more edges, something that felt, in a way she would have found deeply alarming in the daylight, a lot like wanting. The terms cannot simply be voided, he said, finally. Seamus Quinn bound his bloodline to the agreement. Your grandmother tried to run from it. It followed her into the inland, all the way to her death. It will follow you. Then let's change the terms. She held his gaze. What do you actually want? Not what Seamus Quinn gave you. What do you want? He went underwater for a moment, not vanishing, just descending, the top of his head and then his eyes just below the surface, looking up at her with that unreadable expression. Then he rose again. No one, he said carefully, has ever asked me that. I'm asking. Long silence. The stars reflected in the water between them. The cove, he said at last. I want it protected. I want no boats in my feeding water, no nets, no sonar. I want the cliffside path left as it is, the stairs, the access, and I want... He stopped. The pause had a weight to it. What? She asked softly. This, he said. And she understood he didn't mean the cove, not entirely. He meant this. The shore at midnight. The conversation. The person standing in the water without running. Something that I can come to. Something that knows I'm here. The honesty of it hit her like a wave she hadn't seen coming. "How long have you been alone?" she asked. Something crossed his face. Vast and old and carefully contained. "Longer than your entire civilization," he said, "and shorter than it feels." Nora stood in the dark Atlantic with her legs going numb and her chest doing something complicated, and looked at this creature who had been taking lives to fill a space she was only now beginning to understand was loneliness, and said, "Okay, okay," he repeated, like he was testing the word. "No more tally. The cove stays protected. The stairs stay. And I'll—" She hesitated. "I'll come to the water. When I can." "That is not an equal exchange," he said. "3 lives for the presence of 1 woman." "No," she agreed. "But it's the only one I've got." She met his eyes. "Take it or leave it." The sea went quiet around them. Even the distant sound of surf seemed to hold. Then Caspian said, very quietly, "Taken." She started coming every night. Not because of the agreement. He hadn't asked for every night, and she understood, vaguely, that she could have come once a week and satisfied the terms. She came every night because of what happened when she did. He talked to her. Not like he was performing. Not like he was explaining himself to a human the way she'd half expected. That particular condescension of the supernatural, the being who is old and knows it. He talked to her like she was the first person in a very long time who had asked a question and actually wanted the answer, and he'd had 400 years of things to say and no one to say them to. He told her about the whale migrations, and how they sounded different now than they had in 1800, and the word he used for that difference wasn't pollution or noise. It was something in his own language, which she was starting to be able to hear, a little, even if she couldn't replicate it. The closest translation she managed was the silencing of old conversations. He told her about the ships, centuries of them. He described the wooden hulls of the early trade vessels the way a person describes former neighbors, by character, by habit, by what they left behind. He had opinions about the ironclads that she found almost funny in their vehemence. "Arrogant," he said flatly. "The wood ships understood they were guests. The iron ships forgot." "What about the current ships?" she asked. "The container ships?" His expression went somewhere she didn't try to follow. "Those don't forget," he said. "They never knew." He started coming closer. It happened gradually. The distance that first week had been 10 feet, the second week 6, the third week he was close enough that she could see the faint bioluminescence in his scales when the cloud cover was heavy, a blue-green pulse that moved in patterns she was starting to recognize as mood. She didn't tell him she'd noticed. She filed it away, the way she filed everything about him, carefully, completely, with the feeling of someone cataloguing something they might not get to keep. She was falling in love with something that had drowned 3 people a year for 4 centuries. She was aware this was a problem. She was finding, with some alarm, that it was not sufficient reason to stop. He was curious about her in return, in a way that was somehow both more and less than human curiosity. He asked about her work. She was a maritime archivist, which had made her grandmother's choice to never discuss the sea even more darkly funny in retrospect, with the focused attention of someone who genuinely wanted to understand, not just gather data. He asked about her life before Callowwick. He asked about the people she missed. When she talked about her parents, dead 3 years now, something in his face went careful and soft in a way she was learning to recognize as the closest he came to sorrow. "You have no family left," he said one night. It wasn't pity. It was an observation made with the weight of someone who understood what that meant from the inside. "Just me," she said. "Just you," he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like a different kind of statement entirely. The night it changed, she had been in the water up to her waist. She wasn't sure when she'd started doing that, edging deeper by inches, every visit, the cold becoming familiar, the dark water becoming known. She was standing with the surface at her hips, and he was a foot away, close enough that she could have reached out, and she was telling him about the letters she'd found in her grandmother's things. Old letters, written in a hand that kept, changing over decades, that she'd only recently understood were all from the same person, getting older, when he did something she hadn't expected. He reached up and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face. 2 fingers, very careful, the back of them brushing her cheek. Gone before she could react. He looked at her after with the expression of someone who has done something they decided to do and are now waiting to see what it costs them. Nora looked back at him. "That was very deliberate," she said, keeping her voice steady with some effort. "Yes." "Why?" He considered the question with the gravity he gave everything. "Because," he said finally, "I have been watching you stand in my water for 6 weeks, and I wanted to know what your hair felt like, and I have found, in 400 years, that wanting a thing without taking it is a particular kind of drowning." The sound of the sea around them felt suddenly very loud. "What do you want?" she asked, and she heard her own voice lower than usual and not afraid at all. "You already know," he said. She did know. She'd known for weeks. She'd been standing in increasingly cold water in the dark, arguing with herself about it. And she'd been losing that argument for a while now, and standing here in the dark with his hand still warm against the memory of her cheek, she found she was done arguing. She closed the distance between them. His mouth was warmer than she expected. The salt taste of the sea. His hands came up, careful, so careful, the way he did everything that mattered, and she thought, "Here is the thing that has been here all along, under the surface, waiting for someone to stop being afraid and just reach for it." She reached. Callowwick noticed. She hadn't expected secrecy to hold. Small towns ran on observation the way engines ran on fuel, and she'd been seen on the cliff stairs every night for 2 months. She'd expected whispers. She'd expected Bridget to corner her in the bait shop with that uncomfortable smile. What she hadn't expected was the deputation. 7 people showed up at the cottage on a Thursday morning, arranged on her doorstep with the coordinated awkwardness of people who had decided something together but couldn't agree on who spoke first. Eventually, a man named Donnell, 50s, fisherman, the kind of weathered that was less age and more accumulated sea, said, "We know what you've done." "The agreement," Nora said. "The tally," he corrected. His voice had an edge she recognized. Not anger exactly. Fear wearing the mask of anger. Whatever you've told him, whatever you've arranged, it hasn't settled. He's still there, still in the cove. And this is the longest we've gone since any of us can remember without an accident. And people are..." He stopped. "People are worried that he's collecting interest," Bridget finished from the back of the group, still with that smile. "That when the tally comes due, it won't be 3. She asked Caspian that night. He was out of the water further than usual. She'd been experimenting with leaving dry rocks at the waterline, and she'd come down to find him sitting on one with his tail folded in ways that looked geometrically improbable, looking at the stars. She'd started sitting beside him. This had also been gradual, the same way everything between them was gradual. A slow approach, 2 creatures circling each other, neither willing to startle the other. "Are you collecting interest?" she said. He looked at her sideways. "That is a human concept. Don't do that. Answer the question." Something moved in his face, something that looked almost like discomfort, which on him was fascinating because she'd never seen it before. "The original agreement has weight," he said finally. 400 years of it. What we made between us, what you offered, is newer, lighter." He paused. "It is like holding a door open. One can only hold it for so long before the frame protests. So the tally will come due. There are ways to re-weight an agreement." "What ways?" Long silence. The water moved in those deliberate, slow circles again. His bioluminescence was doing something she'd learned meant distress. A rapid pulse, barely there, at the base of his throat. "Blood," he said, "freely given. Quinn blood, specifically. It was Quinn blood that sealed the original terms. The same blood can alter them. His voice had gone very careful. Permanently. But it has a cost. Tell me the cost, she said. The one who gives the blood becomes tethered. Tethered to what? To the water, to this cove, to... He stopped. The pulse at his throat went rapid. To me. Nora sat with this. Tethered meaning what exactly? She said. I can't leave. I age differently. Tethered meaning you belong to this place in the way I belong to it, he said. You would not die, not quickly, but you would not be entirely human any longer. You would hear the water the way I hear it. You would feel the tides in your own body. You would be... He looked at her with something she had learned to read as the expression he wore when he was choosing his words carefully, because he understood they mattered. You would be mine, in all the old senses of that word, as I would be yours. The stars reflected in the water between them. All the old senses, she repeated. Yes, including the dangerous ones, especially those. She didn't answer him that night. She thought he hadn't expected her to. He'd given her information, not a proposal, and she understood the distinction. He was not asking. He was telling her a thing existed, and then waiting, the way the sea waited, with absolute patience and absolutely no guarantee of mercy. She walked back up the cliff stairs in the grey pre-dawn and stood at the top and looked out at the water and thought about her grandmother, who had run from this place and carried its weight her whole life anyway. She thought about 400 years of families living in Callowwick and accepting the tally as the cost of existence, because no one had ever thought to question what the sea actually wanted. She thought about Caspian's face when she had asked him what he wanted, and the pause before he answered, and how he'd looked at her in the moment after like she was something he wasn't sure was real. She thought, what is the alternative? Not tethered. He leaves, or the tally resumes, or she leaves, and the Quinns run from the sea for another generation, another century, until some future descendant stands on a different cliff and faces the same door. She thought, I have been a maritime archivist for 6 years. I have spent my career studying the relationship between human settlements and the bodies of water they built themselves around. I have read every account of what happens to coastal communities that ignore what lives in the water. I have read what happens to the water when people stop listening. She went back down the stairs. He was still there. She'd suspected he would be. He watched her approach without surprise or hope. Just that absolute stillness, the topography reading gaze. Tell me what it feels like, she said. Not the cost. What it feels like to belong to the water the way you do. When it's not the tally or the agreement, when it's just you and the sea. Something shifted in his face. Something opened. Like being known, he said quietly. Every current, every depth. There is nothing in the water that does not know what I am. There is nothing that requires me to explain myself. He looked at her. It is the loneliest possible thing, until it isn't. Until there is someone who stands in the water by choice, he said, who keeps coming back, who asks questions and waits for the answers. The pulse at his throat was doing something new now, slow, steady, warm. Who is not afraid of the dark parts? I told you, she said. I'm terrified of the dark parts. And yet, she agreed. She reached into the pocket of her coat and took out the knife. Small, old, found in her grandmother's kitchen drawer with a kind of inevitability she was choosing to read as permission. She looked at it, and then, at him! No tally, she said. Ever! No tally, he confirmed. His voice had gone very quiet. Ever. And you belong to this cove, not to Callowwick. The fishermen fish outside your marked waters or they don't fish. Agreed. And I can leave, she said. For work. For things. I can leave and come back. I need that to be possible. You will always come back, he said. And the certainty in it wasn't a threat. It was just true. They both knew it. She had been coming back every night for 2 months. She had been coming back to this place since before she knew it existed. In every choice she'd made about what to study, what to protect, what kind of person to be. Yes, she said. I will always come back. She cut her palm. The blood hit the water and the sea moved. Not a wave. Something deeper. A resonance below. Audible that she felt in her sternum and her back teeth and her heels on the wet sand. The sound that had woken her on her first night came back. And this time she understood it wasn't music, wasn't quite language, was something older than both. The sound of an agreement being rewritten, 400 years of weight redistributing, itself around a new center of gravity. Caspian's hand closed around hers. The cold water was warm where he touched her. His eyes were doing something she'd never seen in them before. Not the deep water reflective void she'd first seen. Something. Direct. Something that was looking at her specifically. Only her. The way the sea doesn't look at anything because the sea doesn't have preferences. But he did, she had discovered. He had preferences. She was one of them. Nora Quinn, he said. His voice had the resonance of something being spoken into water. Words that would travel down and down forever. Last of your line, first of the next. Caspian, she said. Whatever that means in the old language. The corner of his mouth moved. After everything, after months of learning to read his face, of cataloguing every subtle shift, she got to see this for the first time. An actual, unguarded, unambiguous smile. Brief as a wave cresting. Gone almost before she registered it. But she'd seen it. She filed it away carefully, like everything else about him. With the feeling this time of someone who understands they are going to have a very long time to keep cataloguing. The sea settled around them. The sound faded into the particular deep silence of a thing that has been resolved. Above them, the cliff stairs waited, worn smooth by 400 years of Quinns going to the water and coming back again. Below them, the cove was absolutely dark and absolutely theirs, and the tide was going out, and in the morning it would come back. It always came back.